Now, the next speaker this afternoon is Trudie Chant, and Trudie is a passionate animal lover and the president of Sunraysia Animal Rehousing Group, otherwise known as SARG. Trudie is a firm believer in community collaboration to improve animal welfare outcomes. Very much exemplifies our theme of reaching out to the community. She holds a Bachelor of Health Science Nursing and Advanced Diploma of Management. She applies business acumen to the work of SARG, diligently working to bring relevant key organisations to the table in Mildura. She holds a director position at the Sunraysia Institute of TAFE. Mid-2015, Trudie commenced employment at Mildura Veterinary Hospital as Business Development Manager, aiming to further deepen relationships and collaborations within the Mildura community. Very welcome, Trudie.
Hi, everybody. Thank you. Thank you very much for that really kind introduction. Before I begin, I'd just like to talk a little bit about the three organisations' logos that you see there. SARG, or Sunraysia Animal Rehousing Group. We began in 2007, which wasn't too long after Mildura Rural City Council took over our local shelter. We began with a $2,000 seed grant from the council, and our initial role was that of a transport group, primarily to move the animals from the shelter so that they weren't euthanased. From that, we've evolved to being an active home-based foster care rehoming group, and we rehome around about 120 to 140 animals each year. And another large part of what we see our role is working within our community to ensure that we get education out there, and certainly working really hard on responsible pet ownership. Mildura Rural City Council is our local government entity, and they run our local shelter, and I'll talk more about them as we go along. And Sunraysia Institute of TAFE. It's one of the largest providers of vocational education up in the northern part of the state where we are. They've been around since 1980. They have two large campuses, one based in Mildura and the other in Swan Hill, and a couple of regional campuses as well, both at Robinvale and Oyen. So where is Mildura? Mildura is a tri-state border town. We're 6 hours via road from Melbourne, which is our capital city in Victoria. We're 4.5 hours from Adelaide into South Australia, and just up the road 3 hours is Broken Hill in New South Wales. So some facts about our local government area. We have just under 60,000 people, and we cover an area, as you can see there, of 22,500 kilometres, which is a fairly large area. We cover about 10% of the state of Victoria. We also have a high disadvantage score, so we have some socio-economic issues within our region. Of the 78 local government areas in Victoria, we're rated as the third most disadvantaged, and 10% of four of our communities are in the top 10% disadvantaged in Australia, so obviously that comes with its own animal welfare issues. We're also on the border of New South Wales, so we do have the Wentworth Shire, which is literally 30 minutes via road, population of just over 6,000 people. They also have a small shelter, but we believe that it's quite easy to bring animals across to Victoria as well. And within our shire, there's 8,000 to 10,000 animals of pet registrations a year. And just before I move on to the next set of slides, I'd just like to set the scene about Mildura Rural City Council shelter. While it's called a shelter, in reality it's actually an 8-day pound. It was called a shelter to create a warmer feeling out there in the community, but it's not a 28-day shelter, so obviously that leads to the urgency to process the animals within the 8-day process. Coupled with that, it's the capacity issues. It's a 31 dog pens available and only 28 cat pens, so capacity is also there. On top of that, because it's run by the council, they also have to deal with things like dog complaints, feral cats, all of those sort of obligations as well. There is a thing called mini pens that we have there. Basically, they're open 24/7, and it's where cats and dogs can be surrendered to the shelter. We'd hope that there's some documentation left with the animals, but 9 times out of 10, they're not. They're simply left in the mini pens. So that's how we acquire the animals through to the shelter. And now I'd just like to share some stats with you. How many animals are we dealing with at our shelter? How many are impounded? We're working from 2007 onwards because that's when SARG began. So you can see back in 2007 there's around about 1,000 dogs impounded and just under 500 cats. And if you flip across to 2014, you can see there's 932 dogs and about 700 cats. So we've had a slight decrease in dogs, but an increase in cats. And really the numbers haven't changed that much. There's still quite a few animals there. So what's actually happening with our animals? If we have a look at this slide, it takes us through who's been claimed. And I don't think it will surprise too many of you here. Terrible rates of cats being claimed, which is really, really disappointing. But if you look at the rate of dogs being claimed, from 241 in 2007, it's jumped up to 321, which is pleasing because the actual reclaim fees have increased as well. And I guess it begs the question, doesn't it, with the cats not being claimed, where they sit in society, which is quite a sad thing. The other thing is that we have quite a lot of high dumping of cats and kittens into the shelter. So who's rehoused at our shelter? And just to explain that rehousing forms the statistics that gather for this is actually the local adoptions that occur from the shelter as well as the work that's done by rescue. As you can see, back in 2007, 270 dogs were rehomed, and 2014 you can see 435 have been. And certainly an improvement in the cats as well, from 52 up to 348. But this doesn't happen just within Mildura. I need to acknowledge that there's 32 groups that actually work with our rural shelter. They're really into working really hard with rescue groups. And it's not uncommon every 7 to 10 days to see at least 15 to 20 dogs leave Mildura by transport, heading down to Melbourne-based rescue groups. And certainly our own small local rescue group simply couldn't cope with that volume of animals, nor could we within our own community. So we're eternally grateful for the support that we have there and the fact that our council has the ability to work with rescue. And this slide is always a difficult slide, so there's 2 to show you here. Starting back in 2007 when SARG started, as you can see, remembering back to we had around about 1,000 dogs there, 354 of them were euthanased. Flip across to 2014 and you can see only 63 have been. And there's certainly been some improvement with cats as well. And you'll also notice in 2010 there that there's quite a spike in the cat amount of euthanasia. Basically that came down to some obligations in relation to some trapped cats, feral cats out at a local mine. Here's the same stats but showing you them in percentages. And I think as you can see there, massive improvement when you look at 35% down to 7%. And obviously still work to do with cats. There is some improvement but a long way to go. So the next slide is to talk to you about some of the existing collaborations that are already out there in our community that we've built upon. One of the things that we do as Sunraysia Animal Rehousing Group is we have an annual dog walk called Paws Along the Murray. And that allows us to collaborate with multiple providers within our community as well as the community itself. And if you wanted to have a look about that, jump on our website. There's a little video there showing you what we've done. And we had our 5th walk this year, which was a fantastic event. Sunraysia Institute of TAFE, or SuniTAFE, the animal studies students actually go out on placements out to the Mildura shelter. And they do that throughout the year depending on when the course allows them to go out there. We certainly have school groups visit our animal shelter, and that's done by appointment. And both the local laws staff and our own volunteers, we go out and visit the primary schools as often as we can to promote responsible pet ownership. The shelter itself basically has a lot of work for the dole and correctional services people on, I guess you would say, enforced work placements. undertaking animal attendant duties. But look, that's a fantastic support to our shelter supervisor. And certainly we as SARG seek to get as many desexing grants as we possibly can. We've got a fantastic relationship with our council and our local veterinary providers when we do have those grants. And just recently, National Desexing Network Month in July, Mildura Veterinary Hospital, where I now work, we desexed 214 animals, and the hospital itself offered that 25% discount off their own bat, which was fantastic. And some of the other things that we do is, we'd already been working with the animal shelter and been working towards the space that we're going to talk about, but we hadn't quite achieved it. So that's where it began. So what is the project? So our project was a collaborative project for our community. We wanted to have a really purpose-built education and introductory space so that we could get out of our community a whole lot more engagement, education, training, with the outcomes being that we'd hope to see higher adoption rates from our shelter and a greater community engagement. Our council had secured a block of funding to do this project, but we had a change of government and the funding went. So back to square one. So that's when SARG became even more involved with them, and we made the decision to apply for the DEPI grant, which I think was happening about the time I was here 2 years ago. So it was a tricky time, but we managed to get there. So just to explain some partners to our project, we need to have the key stakeholders. Obviously, it was our grant. It was a $50,000 grant that we achieved, and we were part of the project control group and certainly coordinated, the community work that happened behind the scenes. The council, they were the key project managers of the project, and they invested another $52,000 towards the project for things that weren't covered off, things that were much needed, such as fencing, air conditioning, etc. And then the other key partner was our partners in SuniTAFE. Their apprentice built the building, and they certainly provided the educational infrastructure, let's say, for overhead projectors, etc. And they also assisted SARG in the community education grants. And some other partners that you needed to make it work, local community leaders. I'd urge you, if you don't already do it, there is animal lovers out there everywhere in all walks of life. Capitalise on that. We get the buy-in, things with our local Member of Parliament, local councillors, certainly local media, lucky enough to have media engagement across all areas, be it from radio to print to television. Local industry, animal industry, certainly Petstock's been a gold sponsor of our Paws Walk since day one, and every time we've got something on, Petstock's always there, which is fantastic. Mildura Veterinary Hospital donated the laptop which completed the education infrastructure for the space, and another animal industry, Pets Domain, they provide a monthly donation to help with the project. And then there's the local businesses that come on board just to help out with those little discounts that mean you can purchase the items that you need to finish the project. So here's the project as we get started in February 2014. These are what we call our TAFE bungalows, and they sit out on a big building block, and they're in various states of building work, I guess you'd say, depending on where the apprentices are at with their training. So, and again, that's just another view of it. And here's our SuniTAFE apprentice working hard at getting it all happening. And these are some of the key individuals, both from council and from TAFE, that were part of the group. SARG's absent because we're all full-time workers, can't make it to these gigs during the day. Here's a picture of our shelter, and just to point out, it's not a very large building and it's a little bit aged, but if you have a look at that roof line, you can see quite a few things there. Council's really strong advocates at doing things like we've got solar hot water there, we've got solar electricity, we've got some air conditioning happening, we've got some rainwater tanks, etc. So they're open to making sure all of those projects are happening. And one of the reasons for having them happen at the shelter is that the community will come out and have a look at what we're doing. And here is the proximity of the new building as you can see, is really quite close to the actual shelter itself. And it's on stumps, so they're digging holes and so forth there. And this was a special day. This is the bungalow finished at TAFE to the point that it needed to be loaded on the truck, ready to go. And that was happened from the February through to the August, so that was a big achievement. And here's our local MP at the time, Peter Crisp, seeing off the building. This was publicised all through our local media at the time as one of the key milestones. And here's again some parties involved. Peter, Melissa in the middle there, she's the person who was the project manager at council, and Sharky, he's our local laws coordinator, and some of you may even know Sharky. And the journey begins across many railway crossings, stopping traffic, as we take this rather large building out to our shelter in Dalrymple, which is about 15-20 minutes out of Mildura. Almost there. And here we are, and we're on site, and it's basically getting it all squared away to where it needs to be. And here's Councillor Ali Cupper, another example of engaging with really passionate animal people. Ali's a cat girl, but she's happy to help with anything to do with animal welfare. She has been the Deputy Mayor at different times, and she's also an avid politician, having been run for Labor and most recently as an independent candidate. But she's absolutely passionate about animals and will help out. And I think we're about to pop it down to on its final stumps there. And here is Ali being interviewed by our local television, Win TV, which sadly since then we no longer have. We've lost our regional voice, like many communities have in Australia. And it's really sad. We watch our news now with just under 60,000 people with absolutely no local content. So the building's there, but there's still quite a bit to do, as you can see. Basically because it's a public space, there's all the additional building codes and things like you see there, which is a disabled ramp, huge amount of cost added to the process. So please always remember these things when you're doing your budgets and planning for these things. Same for out the back, had to have special steps, etc. put in. Finished product, very expensive. I'd hate to say what just that little piece cost. One of the advantages though of having this out on site at council and having council who has so many different departments, they have an environment and lands department, so they're able to do the landscaping as well. And they even found some lawn for us, which was fantastic. And at this stage, the building's actually looking like it probably should be there, and it's starting to belong. So that's the external part of the building. And just to show you a little bit about what it looks like inside, if you can imagine a large rectangle, that's basically what it is, with two rooms at each end. This end here is showing you the kitchenette and the disabled bathroom, and then the large space in the middle that you can use for whatever purpose you so desire. And then this is the two buildings at the other end of the building, and they're two nice little rooms that you can use as like lounge type areas, and that's certainly where we hope that a lot more introductions happen well outside of the stress of the shelter environment, and all with floor covering and everything that can be easily washed. We had extra expense in putting the coving in there just so it could be, from an infection control point of view, mopped out easily. And that's the furniture that Petstock donated to us. This was our opening day, September 2014, and some of you I think will know Gary. If you're from Victoria, you'll know him. Gary was our shelter supervisor for 8 years, worked for the council for just under 31 years, and the last 8 at the shelter. Deeply passionate about his animal shelter and deeply passionate about rescue. We had many conversations about making a space like this happen. It was just about trying to find the funding to get it to happen. He'd retired by this stage a couple of months before, but I was thrilled to have him there and for him to see this come to fruition. And these are some other key people. Obviously the MP, Peter's there, and Andrew Milne from council. He was amazing. He found all this funding from wherever, I don't mind, as long as we got the project finished. So it was fantastic. Tracy Forbes is the Director of Education from SuniTAFE, amazing level of support. She actually acted as a volunteer project manager for me as well while she was on long service leave. And then here she is with her in a formal role making a speech, as I did on the day. And this is the formal opening. Again, really important to do these sort of processes just to get community engagement and to acknowledge the collaboration that actually occurred to make this happen. And in the background there you can see the introduction spaces that are separated there. And that's Ali, again, making a very impassioned speech. She brought people to tears with her speech, so great again to have these people engaged. Speeches. And the plaque, everybody has to have a plaque, but except we were disappointed we weren't allowed to put the logos of the organisations involved, but that was council's rules. The media photos that you have to have for these opportunities, particularly with the pollies. So we've finished the build, we've had the formal opening, but there's still work to do. And these are the things that we've achieved since. Obviously, to have dogs in there, you need to have fences. So council found some additional funding for some fencing. We wanted to finish and have the opening in September to fit in with the TAFE semesters. September in Mildura starts to get hot. We started out without air conditioning and there was no funding left for that, but thankfully council found some funding for air conditioning, so we were thrilled about that. SuniTAFE, these are our students at SuniTAFE, and just to set the scene, prior to having this separate education space, there was nowhere within the facility. You were just in either an office space or you're out with the dog in the dog pens or you're in the cat pens. There was nowhere separate where you could sit down and have some education. So these guys are obviously going over, working in the cat area and then coming back to the classroom to do the classroom stuff. So it's now used much more than it used to be in the past by TAFE, because they've actually got somewhere that's functional to do it. And then here is our foster carers having some education, and for us this is amazing because we're a home-based foster care group. We don't have a home. Now we do. We can use this space whenever we want to. We're certainly capacity building here with our foster carers, and some of you may even know Bronwyn Welsh, we're lucky enough to have train us. She's been a veterinary nurse for over 30 years and she's an amazing animal behaviourist as well. Who's done a lot of Delta training. So upskilling our foster carers, we hope, gives better outcomes for our animals. So just before I move off this slide, I guess, you know, with a large project like this, you would say what's worked and what's still to do. And I guess what's worked is that although we already had great collaborations there, we've improved them threefold by having to work so closely together. And there's also a realisation that trying really hard on your own, you're not going to achieve all of this. Whereas you bring the community together, you can. Our shelters now has an exceptional space, both for education and for introductions for animals. So we're thrilled that we've been able to provide that with our grant. What's still to do? Lots of work still to do to encourage more engagement with this particular space. SARG's put in for a further grant in the fourth and final round of the DUPI grants, and we're hoping to get some further funding for some education. We're hoping to do some pre-pet purchase education sessions out here at the shelter. We want to continue to do some work with our foster carers, and we also want to go into the schools and teach responsible pet ownership from primary school through to high school. So probably the only slide is the last one, and particularly I'd like to thank both Melissa and Tracy, who couldn't be here today, because without them this whole project wouldn't have happened. And if you wanted to see anything more about any of the three organisations, there's our website. Thank you.